was to play hell on the engineering battalions, the guys that repaired the roads, repaired the trucks, and so forth. They had to live someplace. And so what they did, they bivouacked about 18, 20 miles away from my airport. And they kept their noses clean. They didn't shoot at us. They avoided conflict at all costs and awoke at night and did their dirty stuff while we were sleeping. So it was just two different time schedules for these guys. Now the ambassador had a rule. One of the few rules he had. One was we U.S.-speaking people in various villages we lived in 5 different villages throughout Laos, were required to throw a party for all the other English-speaking people in the village. And that was one of the rules. And the other rule was no single-engine airplanes could fly at night. Well, yeah, that eliminated 80% of his problem, because 80% of his fleet was single-engine, O-1 Bird Dogs, U-17s, and T-28s. So he wouldn't allow them to fly. The thing about night flying is you see or you hear something going overhead, and the Viet Minh could just go ahead and throw out 150 people on the ground, shoot the rifle straight up in the air, and let you fly through this barrage and get you. Well, twin-engine airplanes, you can go ahead and throw the throttles out of sync, and it's omnidirectional. You can't tell where that noise is coming from. So they were cleared in hot at night. And we didn't have any twin-engine airplanes in Raven, so that once again solved a bunch of his problems. Because we were always, he would fire us at random for, slight little infractions. And then we lost our job and went back to Vietnam. Now, I had my techniques to find the people, and there were other Ravens who could find guns, and other Ravens who could find trucks, could identify which one's a burned out Hulk and which one's camouflage and which one really is the live truck with live cargo in the back. And various little things like going by and noticing the wheel angle of the truck's front tires. You see, okay, this guy parallel parked in amongst these two Hulks. That's the real one. And little things made the difference. And these guys could find those little things. Now me, I could find people. And I had my little ways of doing it. And we'll get into a few of those little situations when I start telling the stories in just a minute. When we finished our assignments, the thing about it was, those of us who had prior assignment as a fighter pilot, for instance, or as a KC-135 pilot and came over and was assigned duty as a forward air controller and got fed up with the BS and went over to Laos. When we returned, those of us who had prior experiences, when we returned, we knew better. We went ahead and kept our mouths shut, and no one knew we were, and the only way they could tell was in Vietnam, the forward air controllers were had squadron commanders that were ticket punching. The war had been going on for 3 or 4 years, and they sort of ran out of the shooters. The guys really going after things. And all they had were RIMs, rear echelon MFs. And these guys suddenly got into command positions, and their efficiency reports were based on your pilots not getting any bullet holes or not going to the hospital with shrapnel damage or whatever. And so those of us who tended to push the rules a little bit were quickly identified to them, and we became the bad actors, and they want to get rid of us. And one of the programs that goes is exciting, classified, in another war, can't talk about, you got a choice. Court-martial, exciting assignment. Court-martial, assignment. We all gravitated toward the assignment business of it all. So I'd say about 30-40% of us had that choice. And boy, was it fortuitous. It was great. Now the Ravens, over the course of 7 years, there were only 136 of us who flew that title. And we just completed the remainder of our 1-year tour in Laos. Or some guys extended a little bit. And like I say, 136 spaced out over a 7-year period. And only less than a year assignment each. You could tell that there was, at any one time, there was only 6 to 17 of us, depending on how strong the war effort was going on, in country at any one time, at 5 different locations. So we hardly even knew each other when we were doing this job. The folks in South Vietnam the commanders decided, forward air controller commanders decided that they would emulate what the fighter pilots did. So if the fighter pilot was limited to flying every second or third day to decompress, so was his forward air controllers. If the fighter pilot usually averaged 1.5, 1.8 hours, including hitting the tankers and dropping their bombs and returning to base, the forward air controllers averaged about 2.5 to 2.7 hours of flying once a day. So those guys got maybe 30 hours of combat in a month. The first month was used to indoctrination, no combat flying, get it used to the theater, and take the rules of engagements tests and all this sort of stuff, and checked out, and then full combat, go for it. And then last month, they usually stood those guys down so that they wouldn't be killed in the last month. I mean, what a horrible way, you know, you have this letter, "Dear Mom, your son is dead, he bought the farm today," you know, last month. So they avoided that issue. So now we got 10 months, and then you take the middle month out because of R&R, and so the guys were essentially available for 9 months out of a year. And I spent 7 months in Laos, and sure, I get R&R. I didn't get the last month taken off. I transitioned to the O-1 Bird Dog one day. Never flew a tail dragger in my life, and had 36 landings in one day, and boom, I'm ready. Off we go. Now the forward air controllers in Vietnam, we had to take a test on the rules of engagements. It was a 100-question test, and you had to take one test for every military region you flew in, and I flew in 3 different regions, and they changed these rules daily. And if you got less than 85%, you were grounded, could only fly with an instructor until you retook the test up above 85%. So I was always studying for these darn things in my spare time. The average fighter pilot, you only had to take one test, and that was a 10-question test. It was the same test over 12 years, and the left-hand side of the paper was a standard test, and what you did is you put a little small strip about 2.5 inches wide, and you marked the circles, A, B, C, D, down the side, and all these guys had to do is peek across and see where the imprint was. Yeah, this is Charlie, that was Delta, and they were good to go. And we were the keepers of the keys, forward air controllers. We had to know that, for instance, gunfighters check in, you could only put them in on 2 passes from any particular dive angle from one direction with one type of ordnance. Then you had to change it over a little bit. But here's a problem with that. Anybody who's flown fighters knows that the first bombing pass in a tactical range or a combat situation is a Hail Mary pass. Because he doesn't know what 30-degree dive bomb angle is. He just sort of works with wings and says, looks about right, rolls in. He's about 5 degrees shallow, which is typical. And he gets to his release altitude. Now, dropping bombs is just a straight exercise in mathematics. It's a sine altitude, sine angle, and you get to a certain point with a Pipper angle, and the bomb has a slant range. And if I was pretty close to this hypotenuse of this triangle, and like I say, it's a mathematic formula. And if he's a few degrees shallow, the common tendency of the pilot is, you know, lie. He pulls the Pipper up. He's getting close to the release altitude. He's even shallower than he was before. He dumps the bomb, comes off, and then wonders, why in the hell did it go 300 feet short? You know, I don't understand. I was right on the target. Well, I know, right? So what I used to do, as an experienced fighter pilot, is I would lie. I'd give the guy false winds on his first pass. Or I'd lie a little bit about his trained elevation of the target, which would also get me closer to what this hypotenuse for his dropping the bomb would be. And I turned out to have the best bomb damage assessments in Southeast Asia from my fighters I had in. And my squadron commander was an SR-71 pilot, never dropped a bomb in his life. And he was kind of a metrics kind of a guy. He liked to look at numbers. And he comes across this guy named John R. Sanderson, who has the best bomb damage assessment of his unit. The next closest 3 guys combined didn't have what this guy had. So he's either lying about the bomb damage, which is court-martial offense, or he's not following the rules. So he decided to go fly with me. Well, it was a combined OV-10 and O2 unit that he was in charge of, And he flew the OV-10, and he outlawed all his boys from landing at a metal strip, and that's what I operated out of with the Army. It was a metal strip, 2,800 foot long, and he wouldn't allow the OV-10 to land there. And that's what the aircraft is designed for. But he said, I can't do it, they can't do it. So he hitched a ride, came up, no notice, give me a check ride. So I went out with the guy, and he comes back after the mission. He said, well, your bomb damage assessment looks spot on. He says, quite impressive. He said, but I got a problem with what you did. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you lied about the winds. I said, I beg to differ with you. I said, you think of winds as I throw the rocket down there, and the wind drifts down to the south at about 35 knots. Yeah? And I said, no. I use cloud shadows, because that's the release altitude the bomber are dropping, roughly. And so if you look at the cloud shadows, they were going east at around 60 knots, and that's what I gave. And he says, well, I never thought about that. Well, I was counting on the fact he didn't know where the cloud shadows were going, and I even lied about that, but anyway. Then the altitude. He says, you gave incorrect altitudes. I said, I beg to differ with you on that too. I said, you think of the altitudes in terms of this is where you want to avoid the bomb frag. And normally bomb tables are built on fighter pilot coming down at a certain dive angle, pulling 1 G per second for 5 seconds. And this is where he bottoms out, and the bomb just miraculously falls right directly below the fighter. And as it hits the target, he's right over the top of the target when the bomb hits. And this is the altitude you want to avoid for bomb frag damage. And that's what everybody assumes this whole formula is based on. It's not. It's based on that 1 G per second. But everybody in the world knows that fighter pilots, when they go ahead and drop a bomb off, they just reef and sneak 5 Gs in half a second, white wings, maybe even 7, 8 Gs, and whoof, back up in the ether they go, and be done with it. Nowhere near where this collision would occur with the bomb frag in his aircraft. And so I explained this to this guy, and he said, well, I never thought about that. So he went away in a newfound respect, and I confronted him later. The U.S. Army, when we come back in our debrief as a forward air controller in South Vietnam, well, talk about the Air Force first. The debrief airmen in this big old auditorium with 5-foot dividers with cubby holes, and about 35 or 40 of them, because that's how many pilots he had assigned. And you walk into one of these booths and you sit down, and all the Air Force cared about was call sign of the fighter, bomb damage assessment, time on, time off target, next. 3 items. That's all he cared about. The Army wanted you to go from a letter formed into a word, into a phrase, into a sentence, into a paragraph, into a chapter, into a book. They wanted to know everything about every one of those fighters, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, why you chose the run-in line you gave them, what was the target, how you found the target, what was the call sign of each of the individual aircrafts. Was kind of obvious, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, but anyway, you want to know it anyway. And they want to know what he dropped, dive angle he dropped at, and any particular bomb damage on that particular pass. And then at the end of it all, he wants you to have a summary of anything you found out during your tour or your flight that would be of significance to the Army. The Air Force didn't care about any of this stuff. So I had a flight where I'm going to go ahead and take the aircraft down to Da Nang, which is my home base. And I lived with the Army in 101st Airborne in a bunker, Camp Evans. But I had to return the aircraft to Da Nang because it had 100 hours. Inspection was due. So I went to one of these little cubicles, sat down, and started giving this airman the typical Army debrief that I'm so used to. It just came out of it. And it was the letter formed into a word, into a paragraph, a chapter, book, and so forth. And this guy's writing this stuff down. Wow, this is good stuff, you know. And in the end, I said, there's something identified while I was putting this airstrike. I said, in the demilitarized zone, they are cutting trees down about 6 to 9 inches high along this contour line, skipping over here along this, and it looks like it's going toward Quang Tri. And the only thing that could come down this path would be APCs, armored personnel carriers, or tanks. Quang Tri is probably going to come under attack in about 2 weeks. And the very next booth over, the squadron commander just happened to be debriefing another flight, and he stood up, looked around over the top of the divider, and he says, how high were those trees? And I said, Oh, about 6 to 9 inches. He said, by rules and engagements, what's the minimum altitude in the buffer zone? I said, 6,000 feet, sir. He said, you can't see 6 to 9 inches high and at 6,000 feet. I said, well, I take that to mean don't dwell below 6,000 feet. And he says, you're grounded for rules infractions. And I said, I have a volunteer for that outfit over in the neighboring country over there. I really can't tell you what it is or a call sign because I'm not supposed to know about it. And he says, I already have you volunteered for that outfit in another country that's classified and we don't know what it does. And he said, in fact, you're grounded, you're going up to Quang Tri, you're going to sit there and we'll see if that attack occurs in 2 weeks. So I went up to Quang Tri and went out with a special operations guy, and we're honing in M79s and drinking beer and having a good time, you know, anticipating where this attack is going to come from. And I got my assignment over the Ravens, so I took off. I was wrong. The attack on Quang Tri happened in 3 weeks, right down that same trail I was talking about, that the Air Force just totally ignored, didn't tell the Army about. And by the time I got back to Camp Evans after a night of drinking, I forgot about it too. So, now we'll go ahead and start some stories. I went and brought some books here. It's called The Ravens. When we were doing this thing, it was classified. And we in the military just assumed it was a military classification, which involves review in 30 years for possible downgrade. Well, we didn't know it, but it was classified for political reasons. So it was a political secret. And we all know political secret, those two words are kind of like an oxymoron. They don't coexist in reality. Politicians just can't keep secrets. So there is no such thing as review for downgrade. When the war was over, we were just totally declassified. We didn't figure this out for 8 years. So when we finally did figure this out, and bearing in mind we're already 8 years after most of the event, anywhere from 14 to 8 years since we are doing this duty, we thought, wow, no one believes the stuff we did anyway. And war stories are nothing but a bunch of lies. And the longer duration between the event and the telling of the lie, of course, the bigger the lie becomes. And we thought, no one would believe the stuff we did. So let's go ahead and get a guy to do a historical book for us. And we told Chris Robbins, don't put anything in the book that you cannot triple collaborate by independent sources that this event really occurred. So we went ahead and gave him the stuff, gave him $500 a piece, 40 of us, and said, write it. So he went off to his research, and 2 years later he comes back and says, this is too good to pass up. He said, you guys get the money back, and you get the royalties to the book. He says, and I'm also going to pay for the first publication. So $120,000 out of his own pocket, he went ahead and published this one, which Pamela has. This is the 3rd edition of it. And what we did is we formed Edgar Allan Poe Literary Society after our call signs, the Ravens. And from the proceeds from the book, originally what we did is we contracted out some folks to go across the fence, go into Laos and certain sections of Vietnam and break our fighter pilots out of re-education camps, and a bunch of the Army the brigade guerrilla people and so forth that we had supported the whole time, the folks we lived with, the folks we bled with, the folks that were really important in our life at that time, and brought them back to the United States and set them up at church groups, and they became fine citizens of the United States, all without governmental knowledge or approval. And since then, what we're doing more recently from the proceeds from the book is we're giving scholarships of $1,000, $2,000 a year to 10 of them every year. All they have to do is write us a little summary about their experience and their parents' experience, the tales that their parents told them, and they do it in a 1 or 2 page, less than 800 word, and we choose amongst the 40, 30, 25 applications and give them scholarships, all from the proceeds from the book. I can't sell the books to you. I can give them to you, and I'll sign them for you if you'd like, any of those of you want one, but you have to promise me. In the tail end of the book, there's a little small, on the inside bottom jacket, There's a little thing for EAPLS, Edgar Allan Poe Literary Society, 330 Brook Hollow, New Braunfels, Texas. That's where our charitable organization is headquartered. And any contribution, anywhere from $1 to $1 million, will do. And just promise you will make a contribution after you read the book. Don't expect anything until you do read it, because it is good. Chris Robbins did a fantastic job of doing the research on this. Now, all those stories we gave him that he couldn't triple collaborate by independent sources, he sold to the movie Air America. I don't know if you ever heard or seen that movie. So all the funny little flying scenes in that movie was us. The politician in that movie really wasn't a politician. It was a guy named Ross Perot. Now, Ross Perot came through with his 707 and was going to drop off some presents to the POWs up in the north. And we were bombing the city at the time, so he had to divert to Vientiane. We just happened to have one of the guys in the Raven program at that time. His brother was one of Ross's vice presidents. So he recognized the call sign. He raced home in his 01, however fast he could get there, grabbed the Jeep, ran over, met the airplane before the ambassador got there. And Ross Perot has this ability to know where the action's at. And so he saw that's where the action is. He hopped in the Jeep with us, and we sort of had Ross Perot flying around with us and going downtown drinking beer with us and everything for 3 days, much to the ambassador's chagrin. He was really mad. He was threatening to kick us all out of the country over this event. And he never got to meet Ross. We brought him back to his aircraft, and he took off, before the ambassador even knew. So it was one of those little things. The guy, the politician in the movie, really wasn't looking for drugs. He was just looking for action. And he found it with us. Now, I gave Chris 5 stories in that book. And the 5 stories, I told him, don't you dare put my name associated with any of these stories, because I have an Air Force career, and I just assume keep it. And he agreed to it. So he gave the credit to other guys' names and folks who had died, had a similar situation. He combined the 2 stories together. So I'm going to tell you a couple of those stories. I got back, getting ready to go on a flight, and my backseater told me he was a Laotian infantry officer, and that's how we got around all the rules, because it was his country. And all I had to do is say, what do you think about that? And he'd say, sure, let's hit it. So that was my proving authority. I didn't have to go to some colonel or general to go ahead, U.S. Air Force, to go ahead and do that. We just did it, made our own decisions. And he said, we got to land at Lima Site 13. Okay. Lima Site meant landing site, Laotian landing site. And they are just identified by numbers. And so I went in there, and there was a brigade guerrilla unit there, and a guy who's talked about in the book, his nickname was Indian. He looked like a U.S. native. And Indian comes up and very proudly says, gives me a pistol and says, shoot him! And here's this guy strung up with a noose with a 2-legged stool, and he's teetering this thing, and he's standing there. Wait, that's just cold-blooded murder. I don't do that. He said, no, he enemy, shoot! It turns out this guy went AWOL. He got homesick. He's only about 16, 15 years old. Wanted to go home. He left his unit, walked home, and they got him and strung him up. Yeah, and they're going to go ahead and make an example of him. And I said, no, I'm not going to shoot him. That's just cold-blooded murder. And so he told everything. He had his whole unit lined up, and he told them in Laotian, ready, aim, fire. About 85 holes in this guy. And that just showed me, wow, this part of the world, they got no value for human life. I suspected it, but that was a real epiphany. It's something that just watched funny, and it just makes you think, damn, what am I doing here? Well, I got over it. Another little story.